Hey PAPper people, before I even get started, this is gonna be the best video I've ever done, guaranteed. If you are struggling with your PAP therapy on any level, I highly recommend watching this video to the bitter end. Now, what this whole video was gonna be, I was just gonna do a comment section review from my most recent video, which is titled, This Changes Everything. It was an interview with Dr. William Noah. He is the inventor of vCom. He is also the inventor of something that has not yet come out called PAP. What this is a total paradigm shift in the way you breathe. He's a big proponent of decreasing your inspiratory flow, but yet you have a strong EPAP. As you're exhaling, he's found that having a high EPAP opens up your airway better when you need it most. I am greatly summarizing that. Now, part of this interview that was most fascinating to me was a part where I push back on about upper airway resistance syndrome. Now, Dr. Noah, and I'm not bashing Dr. Noah at all, Dr. Noah was not really, I would say he went from, yeah, that's not really a thing, kind of, again, I'm summarizing, to, okay, there might be a small subset of people who might have upper airway resistance syndrome, but not something I've seen in my practice. Again, totally paraphrasing that. And now, full disclosure, I use vCom in my own CPAP therapy circuit. It has greatly helped me out. I'm a big fan of this tech, if you want to call it technology. Decreased inspiratory flow, higher expiratory flow, works great for me. Decreases my cheeks puffing out, which is what was waking me up a ton before. So I love it. I'm not bashing Dr. Noah, but there was something that stood out to me where Dr. Noah says, hey, all the research was right there. We were just not looking at it. Now, he brought up several of these papers. He said, the research is here. We just ignored it. And yet at the same time, I was saying, but the research is there for upper airway resistance syndrome. We're just ignoring it. And so that's primarily what this video is about. So let's go ahead and go through this. I apologize if this is all over the place, but that's kind of the way it's got to be.
Oh, maybe it would help if you were organized, Jocelyn.
And the reason I want to do this is there was a great amount of confusion as to upper airway resistance syndrome and how this comes into play with vCom as well as PAP. And
I just started bi-level. I thought everyone said bi-level for UARS. What the heck's going on here?
I will explain. As a UARS survivor, I know all about that. I just wish people like Dr. Barry Krakow would get this kind of publicity. Dr. Noah came across as being not against bi-level, but against bi-level in certain situations. So Daniel here says, so bi-level and EPR don't work for a treatment for actual sleep apnea problem. Very skeptical about it. And then Ian's ideas, by the way, check out Ian's ideas videos. They're actually really good. I agree. I think there's too much of a one-size-fits-all attitude here. I did terrible on CPAP and was recently put on bi-level. I'm not totally tuned in yet. That's not true. He actually is tuned in now. But this was 5 days ago. But it's doing much better so far. And now here we have this more. I probably shouldn't have watched this video. I felt I'd been doing better on bi-level, but then had a bad night last night because this stressed me out. Don't be stressed. I realize that there's probably more anxiety than anything. I've just had a rough go of PAP therapy so far.
I think you confuse people, Jocelyn.
Now, Bob File down here, I know, right? There's no way bi-level doesn't work. I am way better off since changing. And in my opinion, this is the best one. This is quite contrary to what Dr. Barry Krakow advocates. Dr. Noah seems to focus on adherence as the key outcome and anatomy as his key evidence. But that's not what people with upper airway resistance syndrome complain of. They are adherent, but with continued flow limitations that do not respond to anything but bi-levels. I'm quite skeptical. Anatomical arguments are well and fine, but they don't trump field data. Agree, there's a lot of theorizing based on a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the bi-level modality. For example, I've heard the other guy say that bi-level is bad because IPAP can't stent the airway when EPAP is too low to stabilize the airway. I mean, that's not how bi-level is supposed to be used. It's a straw man. I have extensive experience treating my own UARS with bi-level first, then doing much better on ASV. Okay, who the heck is Dr. Barry Krakow? Dr. Barry Krakow is also a sleep researcher, just like Dr. William Noah. You have two sleep researchers and both of them say exactly opposite things about bi-level. Dr. Noah says bi-level, not a natural breathing pattern. Dr. Krakow, bi-level is a natural breathing pattern. How can this be true, and are they both right, or are they both wrong? That's why this is so fun, guys.
Uh-oh, Jocelyn. This reminds me of my nemesis, Duplo dude.
So now I'm gonna go ahead and check out Dr. Christian Guilleminault. And you're like, why are you bringing up Dr. Christian Guilleminault? There's method to my madness. Dr. Christian Guilleminault is a Stanford researcher, and he found that, I've done a video on this before, I'm sure you guys remember it. UARS is a distinct syndrome that occurs in a distinct population. Now, I mention this because Dr. Noah was like, it probably happens in some random people every now and then. This is my major disagreement with Dr. Noah. Pushed back a little bit during the interview, but didn't want to, it was more about, I wanted to hear about vCom and PAP. But UARS is a distinct syndrome that takes place in a distinct population. That population being typically much smaller, thinner people than you would expect to have a full-blown obstructive sleep apnea. And he says this, any attempt to understand the differences between obstructive sleep apnea syndrome and UARS must be based on investigations into non-obese subjects and include sensitive measurements of respiratory flow, esophageal manometry, which is just pressure inside of your esophagus, as well as EEG's arousals. So not a small number at all. They did 400 cases of UARS and found that about 25% of those had pure UARS. They complained of insomnia, sleep fragmentation, fatigue. Now, UARS is not going to get you a diagnosis in a sleep lab of having obstructive sleep apnea. So you are the people that are like, yeah, why do I feel like crap? I sleep like crap, but my doctor says, nah, you're good. You don't need any treatment whatsoever. And you're like, wow, why am I so tired then? You're the frustrated population I actually deal with a lot. This is something else that's very interesting that Dr. Guilleminault found. Here's another part I found super fascinating. UARS is different because the arousal threshold is much lower. And the argument that upper airway resistance syndrome eventually evolves into obstructive sleep apnea syndrome is too simplistic. All right, now why do I bring up Dr. Christian Guilleminault again? It's because Dr. Barry Krakow studied under him. Now, I'd always heard of Dr. Barry Krakow, but I had never really been formally introduced to him until I was doing a PAP analysis with one of his friends who happened to also be a doctor. And that's when I found out he was a big proponent of ASV, which is adaptive servo ventilation, typically used to treat Cheyne-Stokes respiration. But Dr. Krakow is a big proponent of it for treating upper airway resistance syndrome. And he was trying to convince me that ASV was better. He just needed those settings dialed in a little bit better to deal with his upper airway resistance syndrome. And I was like, I actually alluded to this in a different video. I was like, look at these spots where your breathing looks fantastic. And he recognized them too. They look great. How can I make the whole night look great? Just like these spots. And I said, you need to use a bi-level, not an ASV. And he's like, no, ASV is better. Have you heard of Dr. Barry Krakow? And I'm like, yes, I have. But I just don't happen to agree with that small aspect of this. So what I found was people on ASV, every now and then the ASV will kind of dork up. So forgive the crude drawing here, but this is basically ASV. And what I was noticing is when his ASV, you'll have an EPAP that's always the same all the way across. This is ASV. When the IPAP was doing its thing, going up and down, up and down, up and down, his breathing looked terrible. But then it would get stuck here in a high IPAP, normal EPAP, and you'd basically have this pressure support that was constant, and his breathing during this period looked perfect. So I said, why don't you just switch to bi-level, like I tell other people to do, and then you get this perfect breathing pattern throughout the entire night without all of these awakenings. And he was like, nah, I'm good.
Excuse me, Jocelyn. That drawing is unacceptable for a CPAP cult leader.
So then Dr. Krakow and I had an email exchange back and forth. He was asking about my home sleep testing services, etc. And we were totally on the same page of upper airway resistance syndrome needs to be treated with either bi-level or ASV. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Krakow. And I was going to reach out to him for comment. I decided not to do so because I forgot he had sent me a pre-copy of his book in PDF form, Life-Saving Sleep. If you have not read Life-Saving Sleep, I actually read through a lot of it in prepping for this video. It's actually very well written and it goes through a lot of the problems that people have, but there is a section in there on upper airway resistance syndrome and how it is different and how he looks for things like this flow limitation, which is exactly what you need to look for because you're gonna have these flattening of waves that causes an awakening. And you don't see this if you're looking at Oscar But if you had EEG, and I've told a lot of you this, if you have EEG, you're gonna see it speed up during these periods where you get a little rapid spike up after a period of flow limitations. And I'm actually gonna show you this in my data. So here I did a several night segment. This is my normal pressure, 13, I typically use it. I've been experimenting with 12 lately because I feel like I've been doing a little better on it. Here's 12 from last night. But at 11, I've been doing pretty well also. The only problems I have are stuff like this. This happens to be during REM sleep, but I have these periods here where airflow, you can see these waves are flattening, 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 flattening. We have seen this, yes, we've seen this right here. Doesn't that flattening look a whole lot like that flattening here? Sure does. So if I go to a higher pressure of 12 and I look during REM, I'm not seeing that exact same type of flattening. Now I do have leaks in there, unfortunately. But I'm not having these massive clear awakenings. Yeah, these are a little flat, but they're not causing arousals. And I would say the pressure overall is better. Now again, like I said, 13 is actually a better spot for me. Here's 13, you can see my REM is actually really nice, very flowy. But again, I'm not using ASV, I'm not using bilevel, I'm just using CPAP. But this is just what your waveforms should look like. But if we go back to Dr. Krakow's book here, there's another spot where he says back in 2008, they came up with bilevel, bilevel, bilevel. That is the answer. That is rounding the tops perfectly of these waves. But then they were finding that patients were slightly uncomfortable with that. And so switching to ASV, he found that people were more comfortable with it. And in my experience working with people who seem to have upper airway resistance syndrome, I have found that yes, they are more comfortable with ASV, but more comfort does not equal better therapeutic pressures. Meaning I think they're waking up really just as often. Yeah, they're more comfortable. Yes, they are sleeping better. Are they sleeping perfect? No, I don't think they are. My reasoning for this is you're using the exact same flawed algorithm that ResMed puts out everywhere. They under titrate, and I said this in the Dr. Noah interview, they under titrate flow limitations. So you're still seeing these little wake ups, but the pressure isn't increasing for those flow limitations. This is the interesting part to me is down here, flow limitations. The ResMed is supposed to be seeing these flow limitations, and it's saying, it's a little delayed, the signal's always delayed. So it's saying it sees flow limitations throughout here. Yes, I agree, it does see flow limitations, but it has the same flawed viewing of this as the ASV. So look, we have flow limitations here. Can we all agree that these are super flat throughout here? But yet down here on the flow limitation line, there's absolutely nothing. This could not be flatter right here. It looks like it was hit with a hammer. That is flat, yet the ResMed devices do not recognize these, which is why they under titrate, which is why you have to manually set up both bilevel. You can't do it with ASV, it's not gonna increase high enough for it. You have to set your bilevel pressures with a high enough inspiratory pressure that it opens up your airway. Now, I'm sorry, but this is where we go back to Dr. Noah. He says, no, you can't, I don't know what this thing is, upper airway resistance syndrome, but bilevel is not gonna do anything because your esophagus is made up of tissue that's more like memory foam. It's not as pliable as you think, but that's where this whole thing gets muddied. Who do we believe? Now, let me just stop off and say, if you wanna buy Dr. Krakow's book, Life-Saving Sleep, it actually is a very good read. I'm gonna leave a link for it in the description box. I'll also leave a link for it in the comment section because I think it does really, it really boils down a lot of what I happen to preach. Now I'm gonna give you my thoughts on upper airway resistance syndrome in just a second, but let me first say, part of what he says in his book is something about home sleep testing and how type 3 home sleep testing is insufficient for upper airway resistance syndrome. But I do wanna let you know that CPAPsupplies.com does have this type 3 home sleep testing. I would say use this sleep testing service. It's very cheap, 180 bucks. Use this sleep testing service if you're like, yeah, my wife has recorded me on tape having full-blown obstructive sleep apneas and I wake up choking and gasping. I know I have sleep apnea. I just wanna get diagnosed with it, get a prescription for as cheap as possible. If that's your jam, baby, check out CPAPsupplies.com and their home sleep test. However, I also have a home sleep test service AXG Sleep Diagnostics, we do a type 2. So type 2 is going to have EEG. So if you think you might have upper airway resistance syndrome, do not do a type 3 study. It's not going to catch anything. There's no wake sleep data, and you have to have that if you're going to test for upper airway resistance syndrome. So type 3, beautiful for very clear, yeah, I got sleep apnea. I just need to go through the motions. Check out cpapsupplies.com without question. Great price. If you think you have upper airway resistance syndrome, either go in for a lab or have a type 2 home sleep study like you can with axgsleepdiagnostics.com. Okay, enough about that. Now here's my thoughts on upper airway resistance syndrome. Who's right, who's wrong? Is Dr. Noah wrong? I don't think he's wrong. I think he's absolutely right with obstructive sleep apnea. That's his jam, that's where he lives. And I think he's right about decreasing the inspiratory pressure. I'm very interested in trying KPAP to see how it works and how it works on like broad scale people, like a huge cross section of people. But you have to acknowledge there is a massive population of people, I think, that have upper airway resistance syndrome. Now you are the folks that you increase the pressure like crazy and nothing really seems to happen. I think your tissue is dense enough that CPAP doesn't really move it and you need assistance in moving that. Dr. Krakow is all about this. He recognizes that, yes, it needs a little something extra to open it up. I just think he happens to be wrong that ASV is the right tool for that job. I think he was right when he said bilevel is the right tool for that job. So, is it just if you're lean? No, I don't think so. I think some people have somewhat of an overlap. So, who's to say you can't have this tissue that's more dense than other people that doesn't respond to just CPAP increases, but you're a little chubby? What, all of a sudden you can't have it? I think you can be a little chubby, a little overweight, kind of your typical obstructive sleep apnea patient, maybe even with a high AHI. You can still have upper airway resistance syndrome, no question about it. But most people described with upper airway resistance syndrome are going to be kind of lean, thin, athletic, slim builds. When you're tested, you have a low AHI, probably a much higher RDI. And if you try CPAP on varying pressures, you're probably still going to feel like crap. So those are the typical people. But if you're a little chubbier and you still feel like you fall into this category, I would highly recommend trying bilevel. You want a targeted inspiratory pressure, a targeted expiratory pressure. And with that, I think you're going to be much, much better off. There's tons of people in the comment section that you can see that are proponents of this. And I'm talking of both. Some people think vCom is wonderful, as I do. Some people think bilevel is wonderful, as I do. So who's right and who's wrong? The answer is nobody. Obviously, go through your doctor's recommendations and understand that if CPAP doesn't work, obviously you want to check the simple things like, are you having a mask leak or a mouth leak? Once those are resolved, we're just strictly dealing with pressure. And if that pressure doesn't seem to get rid of your flow limitations and it appears you're having frequent arousals, then increase the pressure. Maybe throw in vCom, maybe try KPAP. If those don't work, I think bilevel is the key. Now, I would say this. From the start, if you have a low AHI and a high RDI and you happen to be one of those lean people, I would just probably start with bilevel. There's no need in messing around with other things. Talk to your doctor about it before you take possession of your CPAP. And I have found that through my interactions with people, through AXG Sleep Diagnostics and my consultations, people do much better with bilevel when they're in that category. Low AHI, high RDI, mostly thin, not responding to CPAP. Now I know this video was super long, but check out Dr. Krakow's Life-Saving Sleep. Again, I'll leave a link for it to purchase in the description box down below. And if you're like Lego Man and you say, no way, Jocelyn, I'm team Dr. Noah and vCom, you can pick up a vCom at cpapsupplies.com. They're $30. Oh, but if you use discount code LANKYFALL, you're gonna save 25% off your order. If you take nothing away from this video, I want you to know you do not fit into a perfect box. You have some very specific pressure needs, modes of therapy needs, and I've really found that there is a lot of gray area in this. One last thing of Dr. Krakow's book, there's a comment, which I really liked. He says, who do you want setting you up on your CPAP equipment? You want a sleep tech who does probably 2,500 hours a year? Or do you want a respiratory therapist who doesn't know what the hell they're doing? Anyone who recognizes that respiratory therapists are subhuman and much worse than registered polysomnographic technologists like myself, he clearly knows what he's talking about. All joking aside, if you want to have a PAP therapy analysis with me, check out axgsleepdiagnostics.com. And I want to say thank you so much for watching this much longer than intended video. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters, YouTube members. I appreciate all you guys for watching, whether you support or not. Thanks. Bye.
Clean your stinky mask with some Mask Bright, available at Amazon.
And time for an extra thick thanks, buddy, to my top level supporters, Doug Toombs, Jason Georgiades, Patricia Espelong, Stuart Hetherington, Alan Liu, Chung Chu Chen, Edward Steiner, and Teddy Stegman. Probably messing up the pronunciation, but it is what it is. I'd like to say thank you also to these people,
you get a shout out.
as well as
Barely
those
even
other
on
people.
screen, but still appreciate the support.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.